Hi, my name is Katja Cahoon. I'm a psychotherapist. In this video, we'll go over two key aspects that create strong emotions at work, and based on that, what kind of tools and skills to use to manage those emotions, feel more empowered, and get back into an action-oriented state. Let's start with a little story. Before I became a psychotherapist, I had a business career, and I started my career at Audi, the automotive company, fresh out of grad school. And I worked on this quite big and important project, which required me to reach out to many different departments and get information from them. And most people were very willing and friendly and collaborative. One day, I reached out to the head of this very large and influential department and asked him or told him about our information needs. And to my great surprise, he proceeded to scream at me at the top of his lungs, just lay into me on this phone call, and then hung up. And I was completely paralyzed. I had to fight back tears. I was just in shock because I couldn't understand why he was acting that way. Well, I did find a good solution, and I'll tell you at the end, but I want to use this story first to illustrate two drivers of emotion. And the first one is the immediate response or the initial trigger, so him screaming or something else unpleasant that is happening. And the second is the story we create around that then drives and sometimes, in some cases, exasperates the emotions. So let's start with the initial trigger. These initial incidents can range, anywhere from relatively harmless, let's say an oblivious coworker who keeps cutting you off, not because they're malicious, but just they're a bit oblivious, to being overlooked for promotion, so not so harmless anymore, to your boss not listening or denying a request, to really these serious incidences that we've been reading a lot or hearing a lot about, like sexual assault and so on. It could also be experiencing anxiety, presentation anxiety, public speaking anxiety. It could be having to have a difficult conversation with a direct report, right? This is the initial incident, and it elicits difficult emotions that we find hard to manage. So these reactions, we can really actually categorize into three basic categories: fight, flight, freeze. The fight reaction is easy, right? Someone yells at you, you yell back, that's fight. Now you go into aggression, you go into fighting, you go into somehow pushing back, but maybe in a way that doesn't feel good to you. Maybe you explode, whatever it might be, right? You feel it's a bit out of control. The flight response is also a nervous system response, and here you might retreat, you might try to appease the person, you might just avoid and not engage with that and just kind of try to escape the situation somehow, make it go away in some shape or form. You might fear confrontation and all the difficulty that can come with that. And the freeze response is what I described in my little story, the sense of being shell-shocked, freezing up, feeling numb, deer in the headlight, right? You don't know what to do and you just kind of frozen there. So all these responses, these three responses, are nervous system responses. This is our nervous system responding to a threat, perceived or real, doesn't matter. Our nervous system still responds. And we have to remember that our nervous system was created or developed way before we had the modern workplace. So what was really very, very helpful at some point when we're facing saber tigers or whatnot in the workplace can be really, really difficult. And with those responses come all sorts of emotions like anger, fear, frustration, and so on, overwhelm, whatever it might be. The key here is to work somatically, so meaning with your body. This response, the nervous system response, the initial response happens in your body. Right? So there is a physiological response and all emotion is embodied anyway. So we want to work with that through our bodies. When we're in fight, flight, or freeze, we're really actually not able to think very calmly because we're in a reactive response and the blood is not in our prefrontal cortex where executive decision making happens, where we can have good communication skills. So one of the most effective ways to bring the prefrontal cortex back online to calm the nervous system is our breathing. What happens to your breathing when you're in a stressful situation, right? It's usually shallow, fast, maybe you're holding your breath, right? It's not calm and level. So one of the first things you can train yourself to do is control your breathing, control your state. So one of the most effective ways to breathe is called box breathing or square breathing. Very simple. I'll take you through it. So just for 30 seconds, take a moment, sit back or stand comfortably, close your eyes if you like. Sometimes that helps to feel, but you don't have to. You can still watch me because I'll illustrate. Take a breath in and then inhale all the air out. Just let it go. And then inhale for 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. Out 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. In 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. Out 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. In 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. And let your breath go. And just take a short moment and check in with yourself how, this was less than 30 seconds of breathing, how that impacted your nervous system. So chances are you feel a little calmer. When you do the breathing and the counting yourself, there's a distraction element to it, and it usually has a very calming effect on the nervous system. So you really want to practice this regularly outside of these difficult situations so that you have access to it when you're in that difficult situation. Now, practice is key here, and you can't do too much breathing, right? So practice this in your next annoying Zoom meeting or your next annoying live meeting, or when you're driving. Please don't close your eyes and you're stuck in traffic. You just practice that breathing and see how it impacts you when you're stuck in a situation where you're feeling difficult emotions. And that can be anything from boredom to anxiety to anger and much, much more. The next thing to practice is grounding and changing your posture a little bit. So again, when we're dealing with difficult emotions, in many cases, we kind of brace against them. So there is a bracing, we hold our breath, our breathing becomes shallow, there's tension, stomach, maybe chest, your shoulders might change, you might sink. Unless you're in fight, then you might be more like this, right? And what you can do here is, if you're sitting, press your feet on the floor. Just do it with me now. If you're standing like me on a standing desk, just imagine you're really pressing your feet down, you're pressing them into the ground. And what that does, you're activating your muscles, and immediately your posture changes. You sit up a little bit more straight or stand up a little bit more straight. You have energy, and the energy that is usually stuck in your head when you're dealing with a difficult emotion kind of goes back into your body a little bit. And that has a calming, grounding response. It can even sort of make you feel a little bit more solid, right? You're standing or sitting more solidly, so there's a more solid feeling in your body. Again, try that next time you're in a lower risk or agitation situation, like that annoying meeting or a slightly difficult phone call or phone call that makes you a little bit nervous. The next thing to do is to forgive yourself for your nervous system response. If you're having a freeze response, like myself in that situation I described earlier, you have to forgive yourself, because that's your nervous system responding, and it responds perhaps because of older wiring from childhood or adolescence or previous experiences. So there just is an automatic, autonomous reaction. You can learn to change that, but you first have to accept, okay, this is how I responded. I'll come back to that, because if you don't forgive, you really get into the narrative. Stay tuned. The other thing I wanted to suggest here is rehearse for difficult situations. So if you know that certain situations bring up difficult emotions, rehearse for that. So an obvious example is presentations, but another one could be difficult conversations with a coworker or a direct report or your boss. Or if you know that you're freezing up in certain situations, do some role play and rehearsal. Enlist the help of a friend or a coworker or a coach or a mentor or a therapist to do some actual role play. Role play can be very, very powerful. It sounds kind of silly, but when I do this with my clients, it can feel really real, and it gives you an opportunity to practice in a low-risk environment and to kind of fine-tune what you're going to say. So let's come to the stories. The story I was making up after that phone call and fighting back my tears and kind of hanging up and feeling really low was that I'm weak. I don't know how to speak up. I'm helpless. I'm powerless. So I was creating this story about myself. I had some stories about that guy too. That often happens. We have stories about others. We have stories about ourselves in that situation. My story was actually really what was driving the difficult emotions that I needed to manage. There was a lot of shame, self-berating. I was really hard on myself. I should have handled this better, right? I should have spoken up, all shoulding all over yourselves, right? And that story creates looping. And now we're looping in the emotion, and it can get worse and worse and worse and worse down the rabbit hole. I'm sure you've experienced that. So soon you have created a whole universe that feeds and reinforces the original emotion, maybe adds other emotions to it and makes it worse and worse and worse. And that's really what you want to catch. I'm not saying that your feelings aren't valid, right? When somebody yells at you, there are valid feelings in there. I'm talking about the reinforcing and the looping, because that looping usually does not lead to empowered action. It can make us feel more paralyzed or so angry that we can't make good decisions. So really catch the story. How do we do that? Well, first of all, we notice that we are in a story, that we're creating a story, that we're shooting all over ourselves, that we're looping, that this is getting worse and worse and worse. And then ask yourself better questions. Seek to understand the situation better. What is really happening here? Do I have a part in it? Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Of course, there are situations when there are serious boundary transgressions, when really there isn't much more to understand, right? Where we really need to work on safety. In most cases, it's helpful to understand more. The other tool that's great here are Socratic questions, and I'll post a few more in the description of the video. And you can also Google that. There's some great resources. Socratic questions. Going back to really getting good evidence. You're almost becoming your own lawyer. So Socratic questions are anything from, is this based on fact or feeling? This might be a belief. I suck at my job. I can't stand up for myself. Is this based on fact or feeling? Is there counter evidence for it? Whenever I ask someone, have you ever stood up? Most people can think of at least one incident as an example. Is this a matter of life or death? So often at work, because we're so passionate about our work, it can feel like life or death. Is it a matter of life or death? Is there an alternative explanation? So those are all good questions. And of course, the other question is, all right, what can I do about this? What action can I take? What's my next step in this? In my case, my next step was to reach out to my mentor, which luckily I had. I highly recommend having a mentor in the workplace. And we discussed it. She asked me some of these questions. She caught the story that I was telling myself. And then we brainstormed a possible solution. And she gave me some really powerful advice. It's always okay to do a redo. We can go back to that person and have a redo. Pick up the conversation again. Have another conversation. Follow up. In my case, I called that department head again. I got into a calm state as much as I could. I was feeling quite nervous. Doing my breathing, my grounding. I had rehearsed what I was going to say. I called him up and I said that we are colleagues, that I'm working on an important project, and that we treat each other with respect at this company. Felt quite brazen because I was quite junior. He hung up on me again. He didn't yell though. And a few days later, we got the data we needed. And from then on, whenever I met him, he greeted me really, really politely in the hallway. So, what have we learned? Learn some somatic tools like breathing and grounding. Rehearse for difficult situations and rehearse how you're going to respond when somebody pushes back or gets angry or whatever is challenging for you. Catch the story and ask yourself better questions, and practice, practice, practice. This is not going to work the first time. It takes a while to learn these new tools and skills, so don't give up, just keep at it.